Okay, here's question 7 on the 5-4 homework. Um, so you got this contingency table, and the idea is there's a polling done based on the likelihood that you would purchase something if it's identified as made in America, or made in our country. And the people that are responding are divided into age groups. So we've got this whole table. Like, for example, this number right here, 6, tells us that 6 people that were 35 to 44 years old were less likely to buy something if it was indicated as, from our country. Okay, so what we're asked, the first part A is, what is the probability that a randomly selected individual is at least 55 years of age, given the individual is neither more or less likely to buy a product emphasized as made in our country. So here's my work for this. So there's a more definitional way to go about this, where you take the intersection and divide it by divide it by the probability of the second thing. But I just kind of like the simple approach of, well, how many people are there that are neither more or less likely to buy a product that's indicated made from our country? Okay. What the conditional part of the probability does is really just changes the sample space. So in this whole study, there's 2,181 people, but really we're just considering now people that are neither more or less likely to buy a product that's indicated as from our country. So that's really just 756 people. Okay, so instead of using a sample space of 2,181, we're only considering this subset, the 756. Okay, so that really is going to give us the denominator of our probability. And then how many of those 756 people are 55 or older? So I just go back here and I look, well, how many of these people, this 756 is broken down into these different age groups. Well, how many of these people are 55 and older? Well, that's 114. So that's going to give me my probability. And when I round that to 3 places, I just get 151. Sorry. 0.151, which is about 15%. Right? Okay. So now we're asked, what is the probability that a randomly selected individual is neither more or less likely to buy a product that's emphasized as made in our country, given the individual is at least 55 years of age? So what they've done here is they've just flipped the condition and the probability. So you'll notice when I go to the work here, right here, it's 55 or older, given that they're neither more or less likely to buy the product. Over here, in the second part B, it's neither more or less likely to buy the product, given they're 55 years or older. Okay. Now, again, remember, it's the condition that gives you the sample space. So I have to ask first, how many people are 55 or older? Well, I go back to my table, right? And I look at the column with the 55 and year olders, and I get 536 people, right? Some are more likely, some are less likely, some are neither more or less likely, but there's 536 total 55 plus year olds. Okay, so that gives me the denominator of my probability. Now, how many of those 536 people are neither more or less likely? Well, if I go back to my contingency table, I see that 114 again are neither more or less likely. So the numerator of these problems doesn't change at all. It's really the denominator that changes. So therefore, the probability changes. So I just do 114 people that are neither more or less likely out of the 536 people that are 55 and over. And that approximates about 21%. Okay. Now, the last question, part C, is asking, are 18 to 34-year-olds more likely to buy a product emphasizes made in our country than individuals in general? So you really have to just compute two different probabilities and compare them. So you want to calculate the probability that a person is more likely to buy given they're 18 to 34 years old. And over here, individuals in general, you're just looking for the probability that somebody in this whole study is more likely to buy. So going over here, the question is, which is bigger? I put a question mark over this greater than sign because I don't know which way it points. Okay. Now the probability that you're more likely to buy in general, right, is just, okay, there's 2,181 total individuals. How many of those are more likely to buy? Well, 1,352. So that's the numerator, 1,352, and that's the denominator. And that gives me about 62%. Okay. Now I'm going to calculate this conditional probability. What's the probability that somebody's more likely to buy given that they're 18 to 34 years old? So we calculate this in much the same way we did parts A and B. We look how many 18 to 34 years olds there are. Okay. And there's 513. So that's my denominator. Now I look at how many of those are more likely to purchase something that's indicated as from our country. Well, that's 207, right? 207 of these 513 people. So now I just divide that and get the approximation. It's about 40.4%. So I would say no, the 18 to 34 year olds are not more likely to buy or have a higher probability of saying more likely. They're less likely. So I hope this helps on this conditional probability problem.